So normally we teach through books of the Bible, but right now we're doing a series where we're taking questions people ask and we're answering them. And so there were no questions this week, so we're not going to just wrap up in prayer. No, I'm kidding. Questions are good. A lot of times we have questions about the faith, and you can still submit questions. I look at them at the beginning of the week and go, what are we going to answer this week? May not get to all of them. You can, but we're getting the best we can. And it's kind of like, again, I liked the Choose Your Own Adventure books as a kid. You know, you'd like read it and you get to choose. This is Choose Your Own Sermon Series, summer. And so the questions you have, and you don't have to submit your name to it. Like, you can kind of skip that. If you put your name and I don't answer it, I'll get back to you, circle you back on that. Of course, you all know I'm always open for coffee and questions any time, except Sunday afternoon where I will nap. So we'll do our best to cover them. Now, here's the thing. I was thinking about this week, though. There's sort of the disadvantage is, when you ask a question, I may not be able to I could do a sermon on it, but I may not answer the nuance you have. And a lot of times I prefer to answer questions sitting down one-on-one because I'll say, does that answer your question? And they'll say, no, it doesn't. You completely misunderstood me. And that's okay. It's a difference between a sermon and sitting across from someone in dialogue. But so today's question, if it's your question, and I don't answer it correctly, is it okay to have doubts about my faith? Now, many people struggle with doubt. We even see some struggle with doubt in the Bible. And so I can't answer every question or every doubt you might have, but we kind of get you on the right path to some things. And so I want to look at, it's kind of a funny passage to look at this question perhaps, but it's something we typically call the Great Commission. And so occasionally, Jeff has mentioned it once or twice in church, if you've been here. Matthew 28:18, starting in verse 18, says, Jesus came and told his disciples, I have been given all authority in heaven and earth. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I have given you, and be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. So that is sort of like kind of the pinnacle of Matthew, if you will. This is like after the resurrection, Jesus is showing up, and he kind of gives the church this great commission. Now, I want to back it up just a couple verses. Starting in 16 says, Then the 11 disciples left for Galilee, going to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some of them doubted. So now, it's funny because you can kind of unpack that. Scholars do. I read a lot of things, and people I think some people, they kind of want to unpack that and go, this is what that means or that means. But I think it's interesting, at the high point of faith, at the climax of Matthew, some doubted. I like a couple of the translations here. The Message says, the moment they saw him, they worshiped him. Some, though, held back, not sure about worship, about risking themselves totally. I've been reading the Voice translation lately. I don't know why. I don't know. It has nothing to do with the TV show, in case you're wondering. But do they still have that TV show? I never turn on my TV. I watch everything on my phone now. I'll sit there in front of my TV watching it on my phone. I'm like, why do I have a TV? Which we don't have cable. So the Voice says, but a few hung back. They were not sure. And who can blame them? And sort of, there's this hesitation, there's indecision, maybe they didn't have enough faith, they were still kind of trying to put things together, and so scholars sometimes wrestle with this passage. And I was thinking about, why does Matthew record this? It's not to say that they didn't have faith. I mean, they kind of turned the world upside down, right? And we'll see that, we talked about that. Pentecost Sunday was a few weeks ago. The Holy Spirit comes down, and, there's some bold people. Peter goes from, like, very unbold, messed up, to, preaching and being bold about things. It shows that sometimes you can have a mix of both. And they couldn't really process and understand things. And a lot of times people have doubts and struggles in their faith, and we're kind of scared to admit it. We don't want to say, man, I'm struggling with this or that. But doubt is a part of faith. And so, there's a story where, I think I actually mentioned it a couple weeks ago. We occasionally mention it. It's a guy named Peter. He starts walking on the water. And Matthew 14, just a few chapters before this, it says, Immediately after this, Jesus insists his disciples get back into the boat and cross the other side of the lake where he sent the people home. While he sent the people home. After sending them home, he went up to the hills by himself to pray. Night fell while he was still there. And, Jesus had a lot going on at this point. His cousin, John the Baptist, had been killed, his head on a plate. He'd fed 5,000 people. He's sending people home. And I picture it's like probably a process sending people home. You ever had like a party and you're trying to get everyone out? That's kind of how this was. I mean, Jesus, he's doing cool stuff, feeds 5,000 people. People kind of want to hang around, and there's always that guest who won't leave, won't take the sort of hint, It's like you've turned off all the lights, you're like locked the door on the way out. But, you kind of picture, or maybe some of us after church, we talk for a while. There's some weeks we're here for a while, I'm like, just lock the door on your way out, it's 2 p.m., I'm hungry, I'm already started my nap, I'm leaving. I think that happened a couple weeks ago. Anyway, and so, you kind of picture that, and so Mark, actually, it's interesting, you have the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the Matthew, Mark, and Luke are the synoptic gospels. They kind of tell the same stories, a little different, add some different details. He adds that it's about 3 o'clock in the morning when this happens. And so, meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble, far away from land, for a strong wind had risen. He says it too. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came towards them walking on the water. And when the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. In their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost!" And you kind of picture the shock of somebody walking on water. Now, we've read the Bible, you've read the story, so you're thinking, yeah, Jesus walks on water. But picture, back then, they didn't know Jesus could walk on water. That was not a category of things, like let's check to see if people walk on water, then we'll know it's the Lord. And so not, and it startles people. And I remember, I was a bad youth pastor sometimes. I posted a video one time. This is like the early days of Facebook or MySpace. I forget. That's the fact that I'm mentioning MySpace tells you how old this was. And I remember posting this video, and it's like you still see it on Facebook and stuff sometimes. It's like you have to kind of like follow the maze or something around with your finger, and it's like, and then at the end, it's like it's someone screaming, and it startles you, and you kind of go, ha ha ha. I had a friend. It put him into like some sort of psychological condition, and I got chastised. So it's kind of that. It's something that surprises you, right? Like people don't walk on water, and so there it is. And so Jesus spoke at once. He says, "Don't be afraid. Take courage. I'm here." And Peter says, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come out to you walking on the water." Well, I always wonder, like, what if it wasn't him? Like, if it's you. Oh wait, it's not you, and now I'm drowning. But anyway, Peter's got faith. He gets out, and we pick on Peter, but Peter's the only one who does this, right? He gets out of the boat, and Jesus says, "Yes, come," and he comes over, and it says, he starts walking on the water towards Jesus, so he's like the second person to walk on water that we know about, right? And it says, when the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified. When he saw him, he was terrified and began to sink. He said, "Save me, Lord." And Jesus reached out and pushed him under the water further. No, he didn't. No, he reaches out and he grabs him, right? Like some of you were like, I never read that part of the story. That's in the Matthew version, right? What does Mark say? No. The point is, he says, "You have little faith, why do you doubt me?" And he uses the same word that we have there in Matthew 28. There's this doubt. And so it's, here's the thing. There's faith. Peter's the only one to get out of the boat, right? Like the others are a bunch of boat potatoes. They don't get out. They're like, "I'm not getting out of the boat. That's crazy." I mean, they didn't even go, "Man, Peter's getting out of the boat. Can we all get out of the boat? Like, is this what we do now? We just walk on water, no more boats?" But they're the only ones to stay there. And he's the only one. And he started off well and he failed. He gets doubts. He gets his eyes off of Jesus. And there's doubt and there's failure. But Jesus isn't done with him. So you can have doubts about your faith. You can have struggles about some things, and Jesus isn't done with you. And you might as well tell him, because he knows it already. And if you say, "No, I don't have any doubts," then you're lying. Jesus doesn't dunk Peter. He doesn't let Peter drown. He doesn't yell at the disciples, running, getting out of the boat. He continues to offer this path and this road to discipleship, despite doubts and struggles. I've told you this story before, but it fits this context as well. I had a years ago, I was in I like to pick things up and put things down. And so I've been to a number of gyms and a number of things. And, one of the cool things about being a pastor is when people find out, they treat you weirdly. And I've told you, I remember one gym, it was like, I didn't tell them I was a pastor. And then eventually when the guy asked me what I did, they're like, nah, man, what do you do for real? And it's like, no, I'm a pastor. No, that's funny, man. What do you do for real? But, and so it's like, I'm not embarrassed about being a pastor, but it's a weird thing to lead off with because it just changes the conversation when you're just trying to hang out, you're just trying to get a lift on. But I remember one time I was lifted to the gym and it was like, people had never had a spiritual conversation with me, but the topic of faith came up and somebody was wrestling that their kid was wrestling with some things, which is like a natural part of faith, especially when you're teenagers, so you're kind of trying to figure some things out. And so I remember they said, they were kind of freaking out, and they came to me, they turned to me, they're like, well, Friar Dyer, you can get him to go or something, I don't know. And they call me Friar Dyer sometimes. Anyway, they're like, it's because I like fried foods. No, it's a religious term. But, I remember it was like one of those moments, I'm like, what do I say to this person? I'm just trying to lift in the gym, but, you're trying to be salt and light wherever you are. And I remember just saying, can you really believe a faith you haven't questioned? Because, you can grow up in faith, and it's not bad to ask questions. It's not bad to have some doubts. But what you do with those doubts and those questions often determine the path you take in life. An author named Oswald Chambers says it this way: always make a practice to stir your own mind thoroughly, to think through what you have easily believed. Your position is not really yours until you make it yours through suffering and study. And so there's this, you hear stuff, but there's a process in which we wrestle and we struggle with things to really make it our own faith. We often struggle with God, but faith can make it come out stronger. I think a great metaphor of this is Genesis chapter 32, and I don't have to say any more. You all know what's in there. So I think that makes my point for today. No, I'm kidding. There's some of you are like, I didn't check that. I was scrolling through. But there's this story where, Jacob, and Jacob's one of the patriarchs. He's kind of the Jewish people come from him. And so, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Esau, you may remember the story. They were kind of like two brothers that kind of fought forever. Some of you kind of really get that story. But he kind of deceives Esau out of his birthright. He kind of takes off to another country because he's like, Esau gonna kill me for real. And we read Cain and Abel, so we know that happens, right? And so he takes off. He comes back later, and he's got wives, and he's got flocks and herds and everything. And so he's kind of about to make amends with Esau and try to make things right. Spoiler alert, it works out. They're okay. But there's a story, Genesis 32, where Jacob, and because, I wrestled. I don't know if I've ever mentioned that. I love football, but I ended up wrestling because I was better at it. Jacob, there's a story where he wrestles with an angel of God. He wrestles with the Lord. And I think that's a great one because it's real. And then in the middle of it, God changes his name from Jacob, which kind of sounds like deceiver, to Israel. And so, he's like, sometimes you have to go to the mat with God. Your faith can be something you wrestle with. But in the end, when you wrestle with faith, it can come out stronger than it was at the beginning. And so I was thinking, how do I deal with my doubts? Number one, don't deny your doubts. Never has anyone become more emotionally healthy by just stuffing down doubts and problems, right? And some of the women are like, amen. They're looking at the man next to them and going, because, guys were especially bad with that, sometimes. But just kind of stuffing things down and not dealing with it doesn't help. John 20:25, they told Thomas, hey, we've seen the Lord. He replied, hey, I'm not going to believe it unless I see the nail wounds in his hands, put my fingers into them, place my hand in the wound in his side. That's a doubt, right? Like he's like doubting his friends, what they said. He's like, y'all cray. That's all a little sus to me. I don't think so. And 8 days later, John 20:27, Jesus shows up. He says, hey, Thomas, put your finger here. Look at my hands. Put your hand in the wound in my side. Don't be faithless any longer. Believe. But here's the thing. He didn't say you shouldn't have doubted. He didn't even call him Doubting Thomas. We call him Doubting Thomas. We make up a name for him. Jesus doesn't say Doubting Thomas. We say that. Jesus says, hey, check it out. Do your research. Look at this. I'm revealing myself to you. Jesus just calls him Thomas, not Doubting Thomas. And many of us have doubts about faith at times. And this kind of goes to, I want to say last week, but we had a friend come and preach last week who had been a missionary. And if you missed that, go watch it online. I don't know. But many of us have doubts. Faith is, often due to, hard circumstances. And the first message we did was like, why is life so hard? Because, we'd like to think when you come to faith, everything gets easy. I think sometimes it gets more complicated. It's better. It's a better way of life, a better way of living. I have more joy, I have more peace. It's a better way of life, but there are some struggles that come with really trying to live out the faith. The funny thing about hard circumstances, and I don't have an answer to this yet, but just something I've observed in life. When hard things hit, when the wheels fall off the wagon, when things get bad in your life, people do one of two things. They turn to God or they turn from God. And God wants us to turn to him. But some of us will turn away from him. And that's a whole other sermon. But sometimes, we may doubt our own salvation. Like, especially when you're newer in the faith, it's like, you're like, man, did I really commit? And I've told you guys the story, like when I was kind of coming to faith. I grew up in church, but it didn't take. Some of you know what I mean. Some of you are here, and it didn't take either. No, I'm kidding. Now I'm making you doubt. I remember, coming to faith, and it was like, I prayed the prayer because I found this prayer in the back of a tract. I'd never seen tracts really. I'd seen a couple growing up, but it was like, you have to pray this prayer and you're going to feel different. And so I was like, oh man, I got to pray that prayer. And so I read it, I memorized it, I went home and I prayed it. I was like, I don't feel any different. And I was like, God, Lord, I'm serious. And I prayed the sinner's prayer, and I'm like, I don't feel any different. and I prayed it again. And eventually I was like, Lord, if I'm not on your side, I'm doing all I can here. I don't know. But, it's easy to kind of have doubts to whether we did it right, or doubts about commitment, especially if we struggle with some sins and stuff. We can kind of go, man, am I even committed? And not all of that is bad. I think part of that kind of a doubt is good, because it makes you go, hey, man, my life is not lining up to how I know it should be. I need to get right. And sometimes I think that's the Holy Spirit kind of just nudging us and drawing us. It's not about guilt, but it's about drawing us into a relationship with him. So, it's whenever we're feeling that, it's a chance to reaffirm what Jesus says. He says, pick up your cross and follow me. And so there's times of doubt. Could be a time where we have to kind of go, hey, am I following? Am I putting down the cross? Because faith is a constant thing. It's not I did it once. I had friends who were like, oh, I made a commitment. I said this prayer. And so we shared it recently in the men's group. We were hanging out, the men's group. And I had this friend in college who was like, yeah, I'm saved. And I was like, no, you're not. And I mean, ultimately, it's God's judge, not me. But, he's like, I prayed this prayer and I'm good. But there's this constant giving of your life over, this constant self-denial. And our culture around us says, don't deny yourself, enjoy it. Every impulse and whim you have is probably good. Run with it. Now, when you live your life that way, I assure you, it's not going to turn out the way you want. But we do that. And so we have to keep picking up the cross because we keep putting down the cross. And so sometimes doubts can be a service to us. And the world honestly can seem hostile to faith. Part of the struggle of faith today is that the philosophy and values of the world don't kind of line up with things. They run counter to Jesus' values. And we use we don't say Christ-like here, we say hashtag Jesus-y because I'm annoying and I like to bother people. But the point is we have to be like Jesus. And often, like words in religious terms, they just they don't mean anything to us anymore. But, the way of Jesus runs counter to the world. And I'd encourage you all, we've done a series on it, Sermon on the Mount. You read the Sermon on the Mount, start living that way, that's countercultural. Love your enemies, That's not something most people would say. You know, like most people in the world are, oh yeah, I definitely love your enemies, forgive them, bless them, serve them. You should probably give money to your church. People think you're nuts when you live this way. But that, you know, and it's easy then when you're kind of living in one world, but trying to be a part of this other world that Jesus has given us citizenship in the kingdom of heaven, there's some tensions. And so it naturally comes that way. And then there's a big fancy word, some of you have heard it, some of you haven't, deconstructing faith. Now, if you've heard that word, you probably have an opinion one way or other, something here, there, and you're all wrong. No, it's a very complicated thing. I was cutting the grass, I was listening to some things on deconstruction last night, and I'm like, man, I think that guy missed it, I think they just get it. But sometimes, and it's a big topic, we can talk about it, we can sit down and have coffee about it, but a lot of times people who are deconstructing faith, it's because they've been a part of bad things. Like churches that don't really live out the Bible, make up all kinds of extra rules. They you know, and a lot of times people can tube their faith but often it's replacing bad teaching with good. And so there could be a deconstruction, reconstruction to good, because a lot of times we learn about the Bible growing up may or may not be true. And so it's easy to kind of deconstruct because you didn't grow up in a healthy church environment. Not here. I mean, here we got it all together. You know, it's those people. But you know, or even sometimes, you know, people grow up in Christian homes where the parents are abusive, and then bringing them to church, that's a struggle. And so there's times where people are deconstructing, trying to figure it out. You know, and I've often, you know, Denise and I both say this, and we've said it, and, you know, I feel like sometimes Deepwater has been like a MASH unit. Some of you know some of you are like, why is he singing now? There was this show, it was called MASH, and I don't know what MASH stands for, medical something. There you go. It stands for something military. But you know, MASH, you know, if you saw the show, it's like they were kind of the people would come in wounded, and they have to kind of prepare them, you know, get them well, and then they ship them off to the real hospital, right? And there's times when we've been a MASH unit because people come wounded. You know, people come with church hurt. You know, we had a great discussion with that Tove book. You know, it was fun because like half the people had never really experienced church hurt, and that was awesome. You know, but the other half had been like, oh yeah, every story in that seems really familiar to me. And a lot of times people deconstruct because, you know, it's been tough. And so we need to be a place where, you know, we don't shoot our wounded. we help people in faith, and we help people reconstruct Christian faith. And you know, sometimes there's intellectual doubts. And I've talked about this before. There's some people struggle with this, you know, the faith and science thing. I don't struggle so much with faith and science because I'm awesome. No, I'm kidding. You know, there's a great title of a book. It's on my shelf, and you know, you can borrow it if you want. But it's like, I love it. It's like, you know, 'cause in the beginning, you know, it's the beginning of the Bible. They go like, in the beginning, we misunderstood, because it talks about faith and science and different ways of seeing things. And you know, here's the thing. I don't know if you realize this. God gave us brains. It's okay to use it. And you know, often conflicts with faith and science have more to do with misunderstandings of one or the other or both. I was always drawn to science. Those of you who don't know, I majored in chemistry, which is typical for pastors. You know, because it comes in so useful. It's, you know, I'm always using my chemistry degree. I don't know. But I remember, actually, it was funny. I ended up, because I was interested in faith while I was in college, and I started taking all these religious studies courses, and because it was sort of, so when I would go to like chemistry classes, I would tell them I'm a religious studies major. I'm studying quantum mechanics, you know, and they're like, why? I just, you know, I think, you know, the uncertainty of things. And they're like, and then I'd go to my upper study level religious studies class and be like, I'm a chemistry major. They're like, why are you in this class? I'm like, I don't know. I turned left. I should turn right. I don't. Anyway, fun stuff. But I used to love, you know, I used to love it. And, you know, there's not the big conflict of science and faith like people think. A lot of times it's how you approach both. And there's a whole lot of scientists who don't have faith, But there's a whole lot of scientists who do. You know, Nacho Libre, there's this tension between Nacho Libre and Esquilito. And, you know, I remember Esquilito says, I don't believe in God, I believe in science. And that's your movie quote for the day. But you really believe in both. It's not these things that you can't do both. And you know, science is just this human attempt to understand God's artwork. And you know, I've told you, Dr. Sarah Salviander, I follow her on Twitter, X, or whatever it is now, astrophysicist. She specializes in quasars, supermassive black holes, and she's also a power lifter. So, you know, faith, science, and powerlifting, I had to follow her. Good follow on Twitter. But she grew up atheist. You know, you know, a lot of people think, you know, you're only religious because you're raised that way. She was the opposite. You know, and through study of science, you know, she used to like sneer at Christians in high school, but the study of science actually led her to faith. You know, there was a guy in our you know, movement. He wrote a book called Preaching. Maybe it is rocket scientist because he has a degree in aerospace engineering. I don't know. It's kind of funny. And, you know, but some Christians don't get science. I remember going to a church one time when I was a younger believer, and the pastor was ranting about, you know, the second law of thermodynamics, and I'm like, I like went home, I reviewed some materials and physics things, and I was like, I don't see the conflict. And I went in, I was asking them, I was like, okay, you know, you said this morning in the sermon, and they're like, oh, I don't know what I said, I just said something. But it was like they just repeated something they'd heard, and that's a disservice to Christianity. You know, we create this fake disagreement between faith and science, and it's okay to believe in both. You know, problem is, you know, faith and science are often seen incorrectly. Faith isn't just simply belief in spite of evidence contrary. Faith is based on evidence and experience. You know, we can have it. You know, number one. Number two is, you know, just this, when we struggle, you know, we can pray when we doubt. The Spirit, you know, Mark 9:22, this story about Jesus is this guy comes up to Jesus. The Spirit often throws him in the fire or water, trying to kill him. Have mercy on us, help us if he can. And you kind of picture a guy, you know, desperate for medical care for his kid. And if you're a parent, you get this. Like, you would do anything, right? There's this desperation, you know, help us if you can. And there's sort of, you know, oh man, you kind of this guarded hope. Maybe Jesus can help. And Jesus answers, he says, what do you mean if I can? Anything is possible, a person who believes. The father instantly cried out, I do believe, but help me overcome my unbelief. You know, a lot of us have been there. There's struggles to faith. There's doubt. But, you know, but Jesus comes through and he heals. But again, you can admit we have struggles and doubt and you're not sure of things. Richard Dawkins, an atheist, said, faith is a great cop-out, the excuse to evade the need to think and evaluate evidence. Faith is a belief in spite of, and perhaps because of, the lack of evidence. I disagree with that. In case you were wondering where Jeff's going with that. Hebrews 11:1 says, now faith is assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. You know, it's not a contradiction, but, you know, it's a different way of seeing life. And, you know, I don't hate atheists, but they're seeing things the wrong way. You know, I can't see it, but believe it. I can't see it, but we still have evidence for it. You know, faith that a plane will fly. Have you ever looked at a plane? They do not look like they should fly. Like you go to the airport, you're like, I'm getting on that thing. Some of you fly a lot. You know, it's just like, man, like some of the smaller planes look like they fly. The bigger ones just look like there's too much body to not enough wing. You know, like you know, some of you fly for a living in the Air Force. It's like you look at a C-5, you're like, that thing don't look like it flies. And I heard one bolt holds the engine on. That's scary. Like it's a big bolt though. You know, but I have a reasonable, rational confidence based on experience and knowledge. You know, understanding lift forces, you know, all that. Some of you may not have studied the mechanics of flying, you know, but and others of us, we've flown, so we know the thing flies because we've done it before. You know, it's natural. You know, I understand chairs will hold me. You know, I understand when I order a cup of coffee, they're not generally giving me a cup of poison. You know, it's like there's a faith to things because of what we experience. You know, You know, and why does Jesus have this side conversation with the father boy? Because Jesus heals out of compassion. And I think the reason he engages him is really, Jesus isn't like kind of offended, but it's more like just encouraging him in his faith. Hey, you got struggles here? Believe. And then help me overcome my unbelief. I think healing someone is a real good way to help someone overcome some doubts and some struggles. Jesus healed because of it, and Jesus engaged Dad to build his faith. And if you've ever flown, it's like, you get on a plane, you have faith, so you get on, confidently fly. You may have doubts and be terrified, but you'll fly anyway. But here's the plane gets there because it's capable, not because of my confidence or doubts. Right? Jesus does things because of his capability, not my struggle and my wrestle with faith at times. Jesus is teaching the Father to believe even when he has doubts. When we doubt, Jesus will still move on our behalf. Even when we bring our doubts to God, he'll continue to work and move in you. Prayer is really this relationship development, too, that develops your faith. I love the Bible. It's not just about the Bible, right? It's about this relationship with the Father. The Bible is a primary way that we develop, this relationship with God, and prayer is that. It's developing this relationship so that I don't just know about God, but you know God. And that'll help with your doubts and your struggles. I've been praying and reading the Bible. It's crazy when you get this old. Suddenly you're like, I've been doing it for 30 years. I remember getting to 10. I'm like, man, I've been doing this for 10 years. I've been doing it a long time. It's 30 plus years. I know I've been married for 30. So that's crazy, isn't it? Man, if we'd had kids, we'd have millennials. Anyway, but here's the thing. I'm in a different place spiritually after 30 years. Because if you exercise your faith, if you work on those doubts, you'll end up in a different place with your faith because you exercise it and work. 3 is talk to people of faith when you doubt. I remember years ago, there was it's funny seeing, Christina and having her back, and, it's like you start thinking about all these people. I did something and I saw old pictures, and I'm like, man, some people have cycled through here over the years. And some of you have been here a long time, love you, glad you stay. But people come, they move. That's just, our community is sort of, transient. It just happens. And I remember this one person in particular, they were coming to church and everything, and I remember when we were downtown, and I used to go down and we'd feed the homeless at the library. They used to let us do that, and it was just we'd kind of go down and we'd feed some people and hang out, and I remember I ran into this girl who was there at the library, and I was like, hey, I hadn't seen you in a while, and it was always funny when I ran into people who were skipping church to go to the library. It was just like, I come here after church. Wait an hour. Then you could say you were busy. Now I just know you're reading books. No, which I get because I like books. But I remember I was talking to this person, and I was like, hey, I haven't seen you in a while. It's like, yeah, I'm not really a Christian anymore. And I'm like, oh, well, let's unpack that a little bit. And they're like, it was something I read in the Bible. I'm like, well, what'd you read? And they're like, I don't even know. And I'm like, okay, well, I can't help you with that. And it was kind of funny. You read something so shocking to your faith that you gave up faith, but you couldn't even remember what it was you read. And I was just thinking, I was like, man, if she'd come to me, not to say I could answer every doubt, but, coming to people when you struggle with faith, going to other people of faith is one of the ways that we really re-strengthens our faith. Because you sit down with people, and they might just have an answer to something because of their life experience, and that's one of the reasons community is so important. If I'm lifting, I don't know, I like to pick things up and put things down. When you lift, it's like if you get to a place where you're trying to bench, a medium goal, like 500 pounds. You're trying to bench 500 pounds, and you can't quite get there. What do? You go to someone who is benching 500 pounds and go, dude, how'd you get there? Or dudette, I don't know. Is there any women who bench 500 pounds? Not yet. Now we're going, no, wait, there was this one girl. No, anyway, that's aside. But point is, if you're a dude and you're trying to bench 500 pounds, you go to someone else who's kind of been there, right? And you kind of go, hey, man, how'd you get there? What'd you do? Is it diet, training methods, all these things? And that's the same thing with faith. You're not trying to bench 500 pounds, but when we struggle and wrestle with things of faith, that's when we need to connect with other people because, they can help you get to where they are. And sometimes, that's why I think sometimes just connecting with people who are just a little bit further in the faith than you too. It's like, some of you who are a little further than somebody else in the faith, you may not think, oh man, I can disciple people. But sometimes it's just being a little bit further ahead. You can go, hey, I was there where you are 6 months ago, and this is what helped me. And so, faith, there's strength in the community. Hebrews 11:25 says, do not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. And so there's something about being connected in a community. And church isn't just about, a building. We do like to have a building where we meet. But it's about connecting and being a part of the community. That's why our greeting time is obnoxiously long. Because we want to make sure you have the opportunity to say hi to people. That's why we have coffee. It's not because I'm so boring that you need the caffeine to stay awake, although some of you did stay out too late. But hopefully, it's something that allows us to socialize and connect. That's why we do coffee afterwards. You could run home and probably make better coffee, although you guys make some good coffee, appreciate it. You can go get some espresso, though. I do love my espresso. But it's about the connection. Galatians 6:2 says, share each other's burdens, and in this way obey the law of Christ. Church is about community. It's about connecting. It's about sharing one another's burdens. And that's what we're supposed to do. I saw this tweet this morning, and I love this, and I don't even know who this dude is. I don't know if I'm following him. I don't think I am. I just saw, some of you are on Twitter, get it. Anyway, I like what he said was like, he tweeted 47 minutes before the message and still made it in. It says, I was drinking coffee and looking at Twitter, or X. We're being socialized for sound bites, 240 characters, mic drops, imbibing podcasts at 2 times the speed. My kids taught me to do that. Like, you can listen to things and you can speed it up so it's even faster because you can get more information. And then calling it having a conversation. Real-time presence at the table across our differences feels archaic, but it's only hope for change in our divided times. And I like that because, so much of life is soundbite. But when you're struggling with doubts, you don't want sound bites. You want coffee and conversation. You don't have to be coffee. You can chew caramels if you want. But the idea is, you want to sit down, connect. And that's part of what church is. That's part of, what we need to be as believers, as the body of Christ, is people who are available to talk and have conversation. Now, that's a whole other conversation because we have to sometimes, some of us get a little busy. I do sometimes. If I don't text you back, sometimes you got to text me again. I was like, oh yeah, someone text me and I'm doing this. Because I get a lot of text during the week. It's a lot of scrolling to get back to where you are. Here's the thing. So, in the end, your doubts don't scare God. Or me. And so, I got a lot to do, but honestly, I will make time to sit down and have coffee and talk about faith. If you have struggles and doubts and things you want to talk about and you don't have anyone else, there's always Jeff. We can sit down. Feel free to come talk. And when we wrestle through them, faith becomes stronger on the other side. They say that just doesn't kill you, makes you stronger. Hopefully your doubts don't kill you. But a lot of times the things we wrestle and struggle with, when we get through on the other side, we're stronger for it. And God doesn't send things in your life to destroy your faith, but he sends things to help you grow stronger in your faith. Our story doesn't have to end with doubts and failure. And no matter how you struggled at faith or are struggling or will struggle in the future, God wants to encourage you and then use you then to encourage others.